we are on chapter 11, Castle Rock. In the short chill of dawn, the four boys gathered round the black smudge where the fire had been, while Ralph knelt and blew. Gray, feathery ashes scurried hither and thither at his breath, but no spark shone among them. The twins watched anxiously, and Piggy sat expressionless behind the luminous wall of his myopia. Myopia is nearsightedness. Ralph continued to blow till his ears were singing with the effort, but then the first breeze of dawn took the job off his hands and blinded him with ashes. He squatted back, swore, and rubbed water out of his eyes. No use. Eric looked down at him through a mask of dried blood. Piggy peered in the general direction of Ralph. Course it's no use, Ralph. Now we got no fire. Ralph brought his face within a couple of feet of Piggy's. Can you see me? A bit. Ralph allowed the swollen flap of his cheek to close his eye again. They've got our fire. Rage shrilled his voice. They stole it. That's them, said Piggy. They blinded me. See? That's Jack Meridew. You call an assembly, Ralph. We've got to decide what to do. An assembly for only us? It's all we got, Sam. Let me hold on to you. They went toward the platform. Blow the conch, said Piggy. Blow as loud as you can. Alexa, turn on lanai table lights.
Okay.
That's better. The forests re-echoed, and birds lifted, crying out of the treetops as on that first morning ages ago. Both ways the beach was deserted. Some little uns came from the shelters. Ralph sat down on the polished trunk, and the three others stood before him. He nodded, and Sam and Eric sat down on the right. Ralph pushed the conch into Piggy's hands. He held the shining thing carefully and blinked at Ralph. Go on, then. I just take the conch to say this. I can't see no more, and I gotta get my glasses back. Awful things has been done on this island. I voted for you for chief. He's the only one who ever got anything done. So now you speak, Ralph, and tell us what, or else. Piggy broke off sniffling. Ralph took back the conch as he sat down. Just an ordinary fire. You'd think we could do that, wouldn't you? Just a smoke signal so we can be rescued. Are we savages or what? Only now there's no signal going up. Ships may be passing. Do you remember how he went hunting and the fire went out and a ship passed by? And they all think he's best as chief. Then there was, that's his fault too. If it hadn't been for him, it would have never happened. Now Piggy can't see, and they came stealing. Ralph's voice ran up. At night, in darkness, and stole our fire. They stole it. We'd have given them fire if they'd asked, but they stole it, and the signal's out, and we can't ever be rescued. Don't you see what I mean? We'd have given them fire for themselves, only they stole it. He paused lamely as the curtain flickered in his brain. Piggy held out his hands for the conch. What you gonna do, Ralph? This is just talk without deciding. I want my glasses. I'm trying to think. Supposing we go looking like we used to, washed and hairbrushed. After all, we aren't savages, really, and being rescued isn't a game. He opened the flap of his cheek and looked at the twins. We could smarten up a bit and then go. We ought to take spears, said Sam, even Piggy, because we may need them. You haven't got the conch. Piggy held up the shell. You can take spears if you want, but I shan't. What's the good? I'll have to be led like a dog anyhow. Yeah, laugh. Go on, laugh. There's them on this island as would laugh at anything. And what happened? What's grown-ups going to think? Young Simon was murdered, and there was that other kid what had a mark on his face. Who's seen him since we first come here? Piggy, stop a minute. I got the conch. I'm going to let Jack Meridew and tell him I am. You'll get hurt. What can he do more than he has? I'll tell him what's what. You let me carry the conch, Ralph. I'll show him the one thing he hasn't got. Piggy paused for a moment and peered round at the dim figures. The shape of the old assembly, trodden in the grass, listened to him. I'm going to him with this conch in my hands. I'm going to hold it out. Look, I'm going to say, you're stronger than I am, and you haven't got asthma. You can see, I'm going to say, and with both eyes. But I don't ask for my glasses back, not as a favor. I don't ask you to be a sport. I'll say, not because you're strong, but because what's right's right. Give me my glasses, I'm going to say. You got to. Piggy ended, flushed and trembling. He pushed the conch quickly into Ralph's hands as though in a hurry to be rid of it, and wiped the tears from his eyes. The green light was gentle about them, and the conch lay at Ralph's feet, fragile and white. A single drop of water that had escaped Piggy's fingers now flashed on the delicate curve like a star. At last, Ralph sat up straight and drew back his hair. All right. I mean, you can try if you like. We'll go with you. He'll be painted, said Sam timidly. You know how he'll be. He won't think much of us. If he gets waxy, we've had it. Excuse me, I have to grab my water. Sorry. Hush, Chester. All right. All this talking makes my mouth dry. Ralph scowled at Sam. Dimly, he remembered something Simon had said to him once by the rocks. Don't be silly, he said, and then he added quickly, let's go. He held out the conch to Piggy, who flushed, this time with pride. You must carry it. When we're ready, I'll carry it. Piggy sought in his mind for words to convey his passionate willingness to carry the conch against all odds. I don't mind. I'll be glad, Ralph, only I'll have to be led. Because, of course, Piggy can't see without his glasses. Ralph put the conch back on the shining log. We better eat and then get ready. They made their way to the devastated fruit trees. Piggy was helped to his food and found some by touch. While they ate, Ralph thought of the afternoon. We'll be like we were. We'll wash. Sam gulped down a mouthful and protested. But we bathe every day. Ralph looked at the filthy objects before him and sighed. We ought to comb our hair, only it's too long. I've got both socks left in the shelter, said Eric, so we could pull them over our heads like caps, sort of. We could find some stuff, said Piggy, and tie your hair back. Like a girl? No, course not. Then we must go as we are, said Ralph, and they won't be any better. Eric made a detaining gesture. But they'll be painted. You know how it is. The others nodded. They understood only too well the liberation into savagery that the concealing paint brought. Well, we won't be painted, said Ralph, because we aren't savages. Sam and Eric looked at each other. All the same, Ralph shouted, no paint. He tried to remember. Smoke, he said. We want smoke. He turned on the twins fiercely. I said smoke. We've got to have smoke. There was silence, except for the multitudinous murmur of the bees. At last, Piggy spoke kindly. Course we have, 'cause the smoke's a signal and we can't be rescued if we don't have smoke. I knew that, shouted Ralph. He pulled his arm away from Piggy. Are you suggesting? I'm just saying what you always say, said Piggy hastily. I thought for a moment. I hadn't, said Ralph loudly. I knew it all the time. I hadn't forgotten. Piggy nodded propitiatingly. Never saw that word. I have no idea if it's being pronounced correctly. I think it might mean like proprietor, propitiatingly. I'm going to have to look that up when we're done. I'll send it to you. You're chief, Ralph. You remember everything. I hadn't forgotten. Course not. The twins were examining Ralph curiously, as though they were seeing him for the first time. Now, this is the first time that I've actually thought about this conversation between Piggy and Ralph, but this is not the first time that Ralph seemed to forget what he was talking about. And so I think Piggy is figuring out that Ralph's having some memory issues. They set off along the beach in Oops, that didn't work. Let's try again. They set off along the beach in formation. Ralph went first, limping a little, his spear carried over one shoulder. He saw things partially through the tremble of the heat haze over the flashing sands and his own long hair and injuries. Behind him came the twins, worried now for a while, but full of unquenchable vitality. They said little, but trailed the butts of their wooden spears. For Piggy had found that, by looking down and shielding his tired sight from the sun, he could just see these moving along the sand. He walked between the trailing butts, therefore the conch held carefully between his two hands. The boys made a compact little group that moved over the beach, 4 plate-like shadows dancing and mingling beneath them. There was no sign left of the storm, and the beach was swept clean like a blade that had been scoured. The sky and the mountain were at an immense distance, shimmering in the heat, and the reef was lifted by mirage, floating in a kind of silver pool halfway up the sky. They passed the place where the tribe had danced. The charred sticks still lay on the rocks where the rain had quenched them, but the sand by the water was smooth again. They passed this in silence. No one doubted that the tribe would be found at the Castle Rock, and when they came in sight of it, they stopped with one accord. The densest tangle on the island, a mass of twisted stems, black and green and impenetrable, lay on their left, and tall grass swayed before them. Now Ralph went forward. Here was the crushed grass where they had all lain when he had gone to prospect. There was the neck of land, the ledge skirting the rock. Up there were the red pinnacles. Sam touched his arm. Smoke! There was a tiny smudge of smoke wavering into the air on the other side of the rock. Some fire, I don't think. Ralph turned. What are we hiding for? He stepped through the screen of grass onto the little open space that led to the narrow neck. You two follow behind. I'll go first, then Piggy a pace behind me. Keep your spears ready. Piggy peered anxiously. Chester, no. Piggy peered anxiously into the luminous veil that hung between him and the world. Is it safe? Ain't there a cliff? I can hear the sea. You keep right close to me. Ralph moved forward onto the neck. He kicked a stone and it bounded into the water. Then the sea sucked down, revealing a red, weedy square 40 feet beneath Ralph's left arm. Am I safe? Quivered Piggy. I feel awful. High above them from the pinnacles came a sudden shout, and then an imitation war cry that was answered by a dozen voices from behind the rock. Give me the conch and stay still. Halt! Who goes there? Ralph bent back his head and glimpsed Roger's dark face at the top. You can see who I am, he shouted. Stop being silly. He put the conch to his lips and began to blow. Savages appeared, painted out of recognition, edging round the ledge toward the neck. They carried spears and disposed themselves to defend the entrance. Ralph went on, blowing. and ignored Piggy's terrors. Roger was shouting, "You mind out, see?" At length, Ralph took his lips away and paused to get his breath back. His first words were a gasp, but audible. "Calling an assembly." The savages guarding the neck muttered among themselves, but made no motion. Ralph walked forward a couple of steps. A voice whispered urgently behind him, "Don't leave me, Ralph." "You kneel down," said Ralph sideways, "and wait till I come back." He stood halfway along the neck and gazed at the savages intently. Freed by the paint, they had tied their hair back and were more comfortable than he was. Ralph made a resolution to tie his own back afterwards. Indeed, he felt like telling them to wait and doing it there and then, but that was impossible. The savages snickered a bit, and one gestured at Ralph with his spear. High above, Roger took his hands off the lever and leaned out to see what was going on. The boys on the neck stood in a pool of their own shadow, diminished to shaggy heads. Piggy crouched his back, shapeless as a sack. "I'm calling an assembly." Silence. Roger took up a small stone and flung it between the twins, aiming to miss. They started, and Sam only just kept his footing. Some source of power began to pulse in Roger's body. Ralph spoke again loudly. "I'm calling an assembly." He ran his eye over them. "Where's Jack?" The group of boys stirred and consulted. A painted face spoke with the voice of Robert. "He's hunting, and he said we weren't to let you in." "I've come to see about the fire," said Ralph, "and about Piggy's specs." The group in front of him shifted, and laughter shivered outwards from among them, light, excited laughter that went echoing among the tall rocks. A voice spoke from behind Ralph. "What do you want?" The twins made a bolt past Ralph and got between him and the entry. He turned quickly. Jack, identifiable by personality and red hair, was advancing from the forest. A hunter crouched on either side. All three were masked in black and green. Behind them on the grass, the headless and paunched body of a sow lay where they had dropped it. Piggy wailed, "Ralph, don't leave me!" With ludicrous care, he embraced the rock, pressing himself to it above the sucking sea. The snickering of the savages became a loud, derisive jeer. Jack shouted above the noise, "You go away, Ralph. You keep to your end. This is my end and my tribe. You leave me alone." The jeering died away. "You pinched Piggy's specs," said Ralph breathlessly. "You've got to give them back." "Got to? Who says?" Ralph's temper blazed out. "I say, you voted for me for chief. Didn't you hear the conch? You played a dirty trick. We'd have given you the fire if you'd asked for it." The blood was flowing in his cheeks, and the bunged-up eye throbbed. "You could have had fire whenever you wanted, but you didn't. You came sneaking up like a thief and stole Piggy's glasses." "Say that again." "Thief, thief," Piggy screamed. "Ralph, mind me." Jack made a rush and stabbed at Ralph's chest with his spear. Ralph sensed the position of the weapon from the glimpse he caught of Jack's arm and put the thrust aside with his own butt. Then he brought the end round and caught Jack a stinger across the ear. They were chest to chest, breathing fiercely, pushing and glaring. "Who's a thief?" "You are." Jack wrenched free and swung at Ralph with his spear. By common consent, they were using the spears as sabers now, no longer daring the lethal points. The blow struck Ralph's spear and slid down, to fall agonizingly on his fingers. Then they were apart once more, their positions reversed. Jack toward the castle rock and Ralph on the outside toward the island. Both boys were breathing very heavily. "Come on then, come on." Truculently, they squared up to each other, but kept just out of fighting distance. "You come on and see what you get. You come on." Piggy, clutching the ground, was trying to attract Ralph's attention. Ralph moved, bent down, kept a wary eye on Jack. "Ralph, remember what we came for, the fire and my specs." Ralph nodded. He relaxed his fighting muscles, stood easily, and grounded the butt of his spear. Jack watched him inscrutably through his paint. Ralph glanced up at the pinnacles, then toward the group of savages. "Listen, we've come to say this. First, you've got to give Piggy back his specs. If he hasn't got them, he can't see. You aren't playing the game." The tribe of painted savages giggled, and Ralph's mind faltered. He pushed his hair up and gazed at the green and black mask before him, trying to remember what Jack looked like. Piggy whispered, "And the fire." "Oh, yeah. Then about the fire, I say this again. I've been saying it ever since we dropped in." He held out his spear and pointed at the savages. "Your only hope is keeping a signal fire going as long as there's light to see. Then maybe a ship will notice the smoke and come and rescue us and take us home. But without that smoke, we've got to wait till some ship comes by accident. We might wait years, till we were old." The shivering, silvery, unreal laughter of the savages sprayed out and echoed away. A gust of rage shook Ralph. His voice cracked. "Don't you understand, you painted fools? Sam, Eric, Piggy, and me, we aren't enough. We tried to keep the fire going, but we couldn't. And then you, playing at hunting," he pointed past them to where the trickle of smoke dispersed in the pearly air. "Look at that. You call that a signal fire? That's a cooking fire. Now you'll eat and there'll be no smoke. Don't you understand? There may be a ship out there." He paused, defeated by the silence and the painted anonymity of the group guarding the entry. Jack opened a pink mouth and addressed Sam and Eric, who were between him and his tribe. "You two get back." No one answered him. The twins, puzzled, looked at each other, while Piggy, reassured by the cessation of violence, stood up carefully. Jack glanced back at Ralph and then at the twins. "Grab them!" No one moved. Jack shouted angrily, "I said grab them!" The painted group moved round Sam and Eric nervously and unhandily. Once more the silvery laughter scattered. Sam and Eric protested out of the heart of civilization. "Oh, I say!" And that's the end of page 178. We're about halfway through the chapter. We'll see what happens next.